Welcome to the Early Education Conversation, where we discuss the transformative power of early learning with thought leaders, educators, and community members.
Welcome back to the Early Education Conversation podcast. I'm Aruna Gilbert, and today's conversation is a really special one for me. My guest today is Vance Aloupis, partner at Strategos Group, former Florida State Representative, and someone who spent his career thinking deeply about education, leadership, and opportunity. But before we get into that, or any of that, I wanted to share kind of a quick personal moment that really captures who Vance is for me. So this story starts on Black Friday, when most people are shopping. Vance, however, takes my daughter on a personal tour on Black Friday of the University of Miami, saving me hundreds of dollars from being in a mall. She was curious about school, and he didn't just give her advice. He walked her through the campus, shared his own experiences, even showed her where he met his wife, and spoke honestly about expectations for college and life. And that moment reminded me that learning truly is relational, and that every early guidance at any age really can shape how someone sees their future. Vance, I'm so grateful to have you here, and more grateful to call you a friend. So welcome. And
Thank you, Maria.
how are you been?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. It's a crazy day in the Aloupis household. Everyone is running around, but very blessed, and it's always it's always a joy to be with you. The nice things you say about me, you are also one of my heroes in terms of the work that you've done. And your daughter is we're all going to be working for your daughter at some point. So I was laying the groundwork for future employment that I'm going to get to work for her. But no, it's great to see you.
No doubt, no doubt. So let's dive right in. What does early learning mean to you, Vance?
Uh, so I think early learning for the purpose, the meaning of early learning has changed for me dramatically over the last 15 years. You know, I started at the University of Miami, as you know. I went to law school. I practiced law for a little bit. And when I joined the children's movement in Dave Lawrence back in 2010, you know, early learning to me was kind of an issue that I was semi-passionate about. I had worked in the juvenile justice system, and I saw it as kind of a tool to ensure, a tool to ensure that children weren't ending up in situations like what I was seeing, which is they were incarcerated at 16, 17. You know, as I've grown in this space and I've traveled the country like you have, and I've talked to folks, I've become more and more convinced that the work that you do, the work that I do and that I've done is probably the most foundational work being done in America. So many of the challenges and issues that we face as a country, whether it be educational, social, however you look at it, I think I know begins in those first 5 years. And I watch, interestingly enough, so many of the conversations we have now about K-12 education reform or education reform. And I just keep thinking to myself, man, if we ever just took the time to look at the early childhood space and get that piece right, then so many of the issues we're dealing with subsequently wouldn't be issues, right? If children were given that strong foundation in emergent literacy in the early childhood years, and they were in those high quality programs that I know you're focusing so hard on in Palm Beach County, you know, maybe then our proficiency rates wouldn't be, 50% in third grade or 50% in 10th grade. And I think it's hard sometimes for folks to be that proactive, especially politically, because people like to see, and you know this, right? People like to see their return on investment very quickly, right? If I invest, if it's a dollar now, I want to see $2 next year. And the challenge for us is, we're trying to make the argument that invest here, invest now, and over the next 15, 20, 25 years, that's when you'll really start to see the fruits of your labor. So to me, the issue has gone from an issue I cared about to an issue that I think is at the very center of everything we're trying to do as a country.
All of what you said, and so much of what you said is so true, right? That's what we've been doing a lot of work on, is trying to tell people, if we would just start right where it starts. Things would go so much further. But I want to start with the first thing you said when you talked about Dave Lawrence, because I know that he's a critical person in your life, and wondered what about you, what you just said is shaped by that opportunity you had to be mentored by such an amazing person.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I was funny because I was reflecting on it the other day with Evelio Torres, who's the CEO of the Early Learning Coalition of Miami-Dade. And Evelio said something along the lines of, Dave changed my life. Right. And you think about this, like this is this tremendous CEO. He's running the largest coalition in the state, great executive. And, an interaction with Dave changed his life. And I thought about it, and I'm not trying to be overwrought, but I honestly wonder where my life would be had I not had breakfast with that man, at this point, almost 16 years ago. And and he took a chance on me and said, I see some potential in this, young attorney. I'll have to be honest, like to go to the movement, I was an independent contractor at the time. I left a job with healthcare and all the benefits of being a lawyer to really pivot and do something entirely different. And I think from Dave, what I learned beyond understanding the issue is that there are fundamental values that we have that will allow you to accomplish even more than you ever had hoped. And the attentiveness to detail, the responsiveness to people, regardless of whether or not they're the administrator, the assistant, or the CEO, that treat everybody the same way. You know this as well as I know this is if you want to get a meeting with Dave and you call him, you better be ready with your calendar, with a time and a date, because he's going to put that on the calendar immediately. He's not going to wait until tomorrow to schedule it. So again, I'm honest enough with myself to say, like, I haven't reached Dave's standard yet, but those lessons of getting back to people in a short period of time, making sure people don't, people feel like they're being seen and heard is important. But then I also think what Dave has instilled in me is that part of our responsibility as advocates is we really have to create hope that something can be better. And I saw Dave speak last week, and I've heard Dave speak hundreds and hundreds of times. And I pulled him aside afterward, and I said, Dave, it's amazing to me because I've traveled this state and this country with you, and I've heard your stories, I've heard your speeches, I know your punchlines, but still, even to this day, the way you command an audience and the way you bring together people, it still inspires me. And I think regardless of what issue you're working on, that has to be, you know, that has to be part of your focus is you're trying to inspire people to believe that things don't have to be this way. Like the early childhood system, as good as it may be now versus, compared to 15 years ago, you and I both know it could still be so much better. So it doesn't have to be this way. And I think that is what Dave has taught me. But yeah, I feel the same way as Avelio in that I really don't know where I would be if I had not connected with him.
Yeah, I mean, and that's such an amazing story because not many people get that, right? Not many people get that person who really scaffolds them and, you know, brings them forward, not in the way that they want them to be, but in the way that really you evolve as a person. And that's a really hard walk to not put yourself into someone, but just let that person bloom wherever they're going to go. And I think that's what I find really admirable about that story. But I will say this to you, Vance, no matter where I've gone, someone knows you. So there's that. You're kind of like Norm in the Cheers bar. Wherever I go, I hear we all know Vance. But what's remarkable about we all know Vance is lots of people know a lot of people, but I've never really had an opportunity where everybody who knows you has always said something good about you. Like I've never heard not one bad thing. Now you may disagree about things, I'm sure, but I've never heard someone say, "Oh, that Vance."
And I think that goes back to Dave, which is, and I say this is really relevant for conversations around politics. And you and I've talked about this, is we've gotten to this space politically where we're very quick to label people. Oh, you're a Democrat. Oh, you're a Republican. Or you're this, or you're that. And I think what Dave's success is tied to his ability to connect with people. And he says this all the time. There's a lot of people that I work with that I would never vote for. And Dave and I disagree on a lot of policy, but our values are the same. The things that we're trying to accomplish are the same. And when I went into the legislature, I really approached it through the lens of, yeah, we may be in different political parties, but I see you as a person that we both may be parents, or we both may be nonprofit executives. We have so much in common. Let's not allow, these fabricated narratives that society creates to push us in opposite directions where we can't work with one another. And again, I always try to be very straightforward. Like, I will work as hard as I can, in my capacity as a legislator, to help find that middle ground. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, right now, it's just the nature of politics. Moderation is not celebrated. Compromise is not celebrated. People want to win. They want to, pound their flag into the ground and say, we won. And so much of the work that I'm proud of in Tallahassee was the work that no one will ever hear about, because it was conversations had in rooms about policy, trying to say, okay, if we really want to accomplish this, here's where we need to give a little bit. Here's where we need to speak up. And knowing that those conversations led to real change. It wasn't being on a podium or being in the middle of the chamber with the microphone. It was those individual conversations that really moved the needle.
Yeah, it's funny that you said that because, I've been in this business for about 21 years now. And what I've noticed is oftentimes a legislation session comes up, there are bills, some pass, some fail. The ones that fail, we never hear about. What's remarkable, though, in the 21 years I've been here, is you started a bill when you were a representative about talking about looking at professional development for teachers. And years later, here it's back, and it was back in legislation last year. It's back this year. It's taken some traction with the PDG grant that Florida has received. And so, and that's remarkable, right? Because typically, like I said, it just kind of falls off. I don't get what I want, and it kind of falls off. Tell me, when you stepped into public service, how did your understanding of early learning kind of evolve? Like, where did that start, and how did it come to be what it is?
I ran for office. I'm very self-aware. Like, when I came into the early childhood space, Aruna, my gosh, this was 2010. So I was 27 years old. I wasn't young, but I was younger. And this, like, most of the rooms that I was walking into were predominantly female and predominantly significantly older than me. So I had to know my surroundings and make sure that people weren't dismissive of me because I didn't have, the PhD in early childhood. But I knew that, my role at that time as a young father, like, I could be a very unique voice in this space. And I was very quick to acknowledge that there were a lot of people, you being one of them, like, there are a lot of people around me who are a lot smarter, who know a lot more, and surrounding myself with people who could complement the strengths that I had. I ran for office in 2018 primarily because the work that we were doing at the movement for 7 years prior, like, we were making real progress. There's no doubt in my mind, and a lot of that is a testament to Dave's, just his persona. But I knew that, as building an organization, it cannot rely on one person, which has been a major, look at the children's movement now. You have Madeline Thakur, who's running it, and she's a significantly better CEO than I was. But we've been able to build an organization that transcends any one person. For me, there was always, like, this urgency with this issue, right? I didn't want to be a nonprofit executive who, after 25 years, was able to, got a plaque and said, you really fought hard for kids. Like, I always sort of, in my mind, I was watching my daughter grow, and I'm like, every year we don't do something, it's another year where a cohort of students leave early childhood and go into the public school system. So, like, there has to be an urgency here. So, I talked to a lot of people, and I said, I'm going to run for the legislature because I believe that what we really need is somebody in that chamber who is singularly focused on the issue. We had people that talked about it, but nobody, Erin Grawl had been there, and she was kind of alone working on the issues. And I thought, if I can go there and help and be one of those singular voices, then we can move the needle. And that's really what I saw my role as, is, being that loud voice for early childhood education, in a chamber that was moving more and more to a supermajority. That bill that you talk about, that was brought to me by one of our friends that you and I both know, and said this would be really important for ensuring that we have multiple pathways for early childhood teachers, and that we continue to professionalize the industry. But I think the lesson there now, and I didn't know it at the time, is these things, like, there can be an urgency, and you should always push to move quickly.
Mhm.
but also realizing sometimes it takes time. Like that bill, I think was passed, was it 2019 maybe?
Yeah, it was a while
And
ago.
yeah,
Mhm.
so you pass a bill in 2019, it's now 2026, and we're just now getting to implementation, which is a whole nother conversation. Not to say it couldn't have happened earlier, but a lot of things were happening in the in the Office of Early Learning to the Division of Early Learning. So it took time, but ultimately it will come to fruition, and the impetus for the bill will be made real. And so I smile sometimes because I was actually on a call the other day where someone was talking about, oh yeah, Florida's doing this, and I said, oh yeah, I said that was my bill. It was 7 years ago. And so there's fruit to the labor that you don't immediately see. It's like, I guess it's like raising children. At the beginning you're like, I don't know, this is worth it, and then later on you're like, okay, I see why we work so hard.
Yeah, I think that's the thing we struggle with is that the patience part of it, but also the part where we want everything to be perfect. We want everything,
Huge, yeah,
you
huge
know,
issue.
that like, and we know nothing is perfect. And
Hmm.
so take the wins and work hard and, to fix the parts that may not be so strong. And I think that's what I've learned throughout this whole journey is that not everything comes with all the bells and whistles, and not everything is going to be the way you want them. But work with what you got.
You're rarely ever going to get perfection. And Dave uses a term, and I don't think he uses it in a pejorative sense. It's just it's the reality. He calls, and I consider myself to my core an advocate. Like I will always be an early childhood advocate. Like he says, we're crabs in a bucket, and no one gets out of the bucket, and we always pull each other back. And when somebody isn't making progress, we pull them back. And his larger point speaks to exactly what you say, which if it's not perfect, it's not worth a damn, which is not true. And I've seen, and this is a testament. This is a lesson for all of us as advocates. Is we just have to keep making progress. And if something's not perfect, that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that it's not good. And I can remember I mean, there are bills like the HB 419, not a perfect bill, but it definitely moved us in the direction that we wanted to go.
Mhm.
And there's a realization that if the goal is perfection every year, especially in early childhood, nothing would be accomplished. Like we have to keep taking those steps. And if we
Yeah.
make a mistake, let's fix it as quickly as possible. And you and I've talked about some of these
Yeah.
structural issues, but at the same time, as advocates, we need to make sure that we are supporting one another, not letting it, perfection be the enemy of good, and continuing to move the ball down the field.
Yeah, I think a lot of my successes, if I look back, came from something I failed at.
Hmm.
And I
100%.
learned, right? And I learned a lot more through my failures than I did my success. And that drives me. It drives me to know that I just don't stay in one place. When you talk about family and you talk about how, your movement to being a representative and I also notice about you, your movement out of being a representative was about family. And
Yep.
so when you're thinking about family, what's one barrier that you would remove for a family or an educator today? If you think of a barrier that you could think of, well, what's the one thing that you'd want to remove?
What a question. Yeah. So I'm glad you didn't ask me like my left, because I would have started crying about sort of my decision to leave the legislature, because there was a
Yeah.
moment where I had to really ask myself, am I doing harm to my own family by not being as present? Right. It was a dynamic where that the work you're doing is so important, but at the same time you have to be selfish and look at your own family and say, what are they bearing the brunt of what you're doing? Not that you're doing anything bad. It's just you're not there. You're not present. And I've told you the stories about reading with my littlest one, and you know asking in a book, or the dad's not in the book, and my daughter asked me, where is he? Is he in Tallahassee? Kind of was the moment where I realized, the political process will always be there, and you've done the work that you need to do. Now it's time to focus on your own family. But yeah, I think the biggest barrier that I have seen is one, like we're constantly having this conversation around eligibility and families being able to access care. And I think not to be too wonky, but as well as I do that, you know, the school readiness programs that we have right now really don't capture all of the need that we have in this state. Like cost of care is still so high, and there's still enormous barriers to families having really quality care. Um, I still think that there's a barrier in having families really understand what quality looks like.
Yeah.
I think we've come a long way. You're seeing it more in the K-12 space where parents are making decisions that are more guided by the quality of the program than just the proximity. I would love to see that more in early childhood rather than, I'm going to a center that's the closest to my house. And that just takes time, right? Families need to start to understand kind of what I said at the beginning, that this early childhood piece is foundational, as important, if not more important than even the K-12 decisions they're making. I really hope that we can get to a place. Whenever I used to speak publicly, I would ask, are there any early childhood teachers in the room, and raise their hand. I said, as far as I know, you're angels on earth. Like, I don't know anyone. Like, I challenge anybody in the professional spheres to like go spend 12 hours with 18 4-year olds and be able to wake up the next day and be like, I want to do that again. Um, and again, I don't think we've gotten to the place yet where we've professionalized we've treated the industry as professional as we need to, right? We don't
Mm.
like we have all these conversations around teacher compensation, which all for paying teachers more. But I've always said, like, okay, let's pay teachers more, but like, why are the early childhood teachers paid pennies on it? Like, why are they at 60% of what a K-12? And you see it. I mean, you see it in the school district, right? If a pre-K teacher in the school district makes considerably more than a pre-K teacher in a private center. And the expectations are obviously, higher. You need to have a bachelor's degree to be in the pre-K in a public school setting. But then you've created this dynamic where, and you've seen it, where if a teacher in a private center gets their bachelor's degree, like the first thing they do is they jump into the public school setting. So like, I always, again, I don't think that has changed, but when I was running the movement, that was always a dynamic that I would see with the private centers where, you want to support your teachers to continue to grow educationally, but they knew that as soon as they achieved that bachelor's degree, they were going to jump ship and go to the public school.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. I still have a dream though, Vance, that you're going to come back and be a representative. And I'm going to be your lackey. I'm going to be right there with you. I still have this dream. I mean, your kids will grow up one day.
they will. And again, but the legislature, like the legislature it's supposed to be temporary, right? You go and
Yeah.
like, I've always felt like the best representatives are the ones who go there to accomplish a very clear, articulated goal. It's not about going there and cutting ribbons it's about like, what do you, and I always ask, like, people would say, when you run for office, everybody comes to you and says, oh, I want to be a representative or I want to be a senator. And my question is always, well, what do you want to do? Why? And they say, oh, I want to change my community. I said, you can change your community without being elected, right? You can,
Sure.
get involved in a nonprofit or get involved in your church or synagogue or whatever. Like, there's a lot of ways you can change your community. Like, what are you really trying to accomplish? And I think what I saw is the best legislators were the ones who were just laser focused on a particular issue, and they were just committed to changing that space.
Let's jump forward from your legislative days. You're at Strategos now, and you help leaders kind of think differently about education, right? Because
Mhm.
that's a kind of a different world that advocacy policy kind of plays. What kind of innovation do you think early learning needs right now?
Yeah, great. So what's been interesting about this new role, and I've been here now for 3 years, and it's been, there's like everything in life. You know it's not that there's just like there's two sides to every sword or whatever it is. Like, there's things I love and things that I miss about previous life, but like, what I would say that I really love about this role is getting to see the innovation that's happening, but also to see how individual states are tackling some of these really big issues, right? The vast majority of my work is national. So working across, at this point, 40 plus states, and seeing how education nonprofits and for-profits are tackling the market. Um, I think the big question that I see is in the K-12 space, the delivery mechanism for education is changing very quickly, right? So you've got private, public, charter, micro schools, home schools, virtual schools. Like, there's so many different ways that are different from what you and I experienced when we were going to school. So like, what does that ultimately end up looking like? Um, the big question for me is in the early childhood space is like, what is the role of technology? I've seen a lot of, and I've seen schools are popping up now where, there aren't teachers. There's AI adaptive learning, and if you think about it, we're kind of at the beginnings of like what the potential is. But if you have a tool that can talk to a child like a human, and can instantaneously scaffold a lesson based upon the strengths and weaknesses of that child, like there's no question, or maybe there is, but I don't see it. And you're smarter than me, so you would know, like the efficacy of a program that can in the moment change a lesson based upon the needs of a unique child and totally individualize the lesson tells me like, okay, there is going to be a point where somebody says these tools are more efficient than a physical teacher, like an actual teacher. The big question for me is early childhood is about so much more than just a child's ability to count or to read or to know their colors. It's about how does a child interact with other human beings. And I think like that's the conversation that I see coming, which is are we taking into consideration the social emotional impact on children? How much technology is too much? How much is not enough? Because at some point, there clearly is too much technology, and I think we see that in the K-12 space and just this generation's, utility of phones and things of that nature. I'm dealing with my own house with teenagers, but at the same time, to suggest that technology won't be a part of these children's lives and you pull it all out, that could have harmful effects as well. So it's going to require it's just going to require really thoughtful policies to understand, what is in the best interest of children in totality.
Yeah.
And again, it's not you, and I'm very hesitant for us to look at any one specific metric and say like this works. Every child is kindergarten ready. Okay, every child's
Absolutely.
kindergarten ready on a test that you can assess them on. But is that child well-rounded from an executive functioning standpoint, from an ability to get along with others? Like there's all those components that I'm a little bit anxious about.
Yeah, and I mean, anybody working in the early learning world, right? When you talked about there may be a day when there's a piece of technology teaching and you don't really need a teacher. That's scary, right? Because we know that so much about context in life comes from the relationships you have, comes from being with your peers and, navigating that space with peers and teachers and parents and all of those things. And unless technology starts to feel and understand emotion and can recognize emotion, I don't see a day that could be optimized. The technology could be optimized that way.
But what a great tool it could potentially be, Aruna, to support the teachers, right? Like if the
Absolutely.
data is being used to support to guide the instruction. I once heard a really significant early childhood advocate say, when they were, one of the conversations that we have is should early childhood teachers be required to have a bachelor's degree?
Mhm.
You can peel that back 100 different ways. But this person said, college, a bachelor's degree doesn't teach you how to love a child. And I think like part of what you just talked about is how do you create an environment that there's nurturing and love and yeah, that is not going to be, I don't think anyone's invented it yet, but like that's not going to be something that is going to be possible through an app or a
Sure.
digital interface.
Yeah, and in Palm Beach, we do use technology with early learners, right?
Mhm.
And but the responsibility we took by doing that is saying we must balance what we're looking at. You have a 3-hour VPK day. We're using it for 15 to 20 minutes a day. And really, it's an accelerator for children, right? It really starts where the child is and then moves. But it also is a tool where we're finding really teaches teachers what's happening in a classroom because there is no assessment tool that really tells them what does Johnny Q or Susie Q do
Mhm.
at this moment and how do they move forward? What do I do to move forward, right? And so I see a lot of change in how we're looking at the data with the teacher and how we can inform teachers how to be really, pushing towards progress in the classroom. So there's definitely, I don't look at AI and technology as a moment. It's definitely a movement, but it's a movement that I believe requires responsibility. And so when we look at, and I know you said part of Strategos is looking at these sorts of policies and procedures and all of these things that are happening nationwide when it comes to AI and technology in classrooms and with little ones. But how do you think we should balance innovation and responsibility?
Very carefully. And again, I'm not, this is my own personal views. I'm sort of in the same camp as you, which is technology should play a role in the classroom. I think it's, uh, I'm not a Luddite. I think that there is opportunities to create efficiencies, but also to your point, to really support instruction and to move towards greater outcomes. And any way that we can create greater outcomes and create efficiencies, I'm all for it. I just think we have to be very careful about the shiny new object, because we're dealing with children, and it's to me, I think what I'm seeing states doing is, they're setting up, and thoughtfully so, right? They're setting up task force, so they're having working groups to really kind of talk through what does this mean. And my sense is like you're going to see it probably happen more in the K-12 space. I know one of the biggest challenges they have in the K-12 space is not just AI on the side of creating efficiencies for teachers and so forth, and on the administrative side, but like how do you realistically address students using AI in the classroom, right? And literally taking away from students the ability to begin to think about, you know, um, you know, how do you form your own thoughts rather than telling a computer what you want and then them giving it to you? And again, personal story, like we see it at our daughter's school, where had a moment where our sixth grader was using ChatGPT, and it's parents have to have a responsibility to make sure that they're sort of overseeing kind of what's happening in their homes. But at the same time, like schools can also put into place systems to make sure that that children are not using these things as a crutch. Because my fear is that over a period of time, if we have a generation of students who have relegated decision making and critical thinking to an LLM, like how are you then going to be able to differentiate yourself when that tool comes for your job? And
Yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying, and I think exactly what you're saying is the most inappropriate way of using AI, right? And it's the
Mhm.
most inappropriate way of using technology. There's a human component to that, right? So
But as
I,
it, but as the technology becomes more and more advanced, right? Like
Mhm.
I've used the tool a couple of times for my I've shown you pictures of my 7-year-old. I'll go on there and I'll say, write a 30-minute story about, you know my daughter's name's Olivia. I'm like, write me a 30-minute children's story about Olivia and a dragon and a unicorn, and it'll create like this beautiful little story that I can I can have an individualized story with my daughter about
Yeah.
her and riding the unicorn and slaying the dragon. But at what point, the technology has become so good that the ability to detect whether or not it was an actual person or not becomes almost impossible. So, again, we just have to. I don't want to. I just think we have to be careful, like, not to like jump in the pool, like wade
Mhm.
into the water.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
Remembering that, like again, as I said, like perfection cannot be the goal.
Right.
Like we're gonna
Right.
have to do this carefully, thoughtfully, and always remembering at the end of the day, our first job is to protect the students.
Yeah, and providing a lot of scaffolding and guidance, right? So that for people who are using it inappropriately, that we talk through that and we talk through what that should look like and how we should use it. I think through the days when we didn't know what a curriculum was for early learners, and we would give them all these dittos and say an apple is red, color it red,
Yep. Yep.
right? And we've moved forward from there, right? And it's all about recognition of how do we when we know better we do better, and how do we scaffold that knowing, right? One really comes from the point of view of how do you know what you know, and for early learning we've got to be careful about who is telling us the information about how we know what we know, right?
Yep.
And moving forward to that. So one of the things you talked about that moved you with your relationship with Dave was that thing that he taught you about consistently giving hope, right? And so I guess my question is, what gives you hope right now?
I know what to believe and what not to believe, and I know that there are very good people on both sides of the aisle in that building across the country. And again, it's just if it exists in Florida, I'm sure it exists in the other 49 states, that people who are really trying to do what they believe is right for their communities. Um, I do have hope, and I talked about this in my letter that I sent when I left, was that when we're on Twitter or we're in front of a podium with the cameras, we act as though we're on a team, our red team or the blue team. But when I would always go into the members lounge and have lunch, it, people didn't walk into the lunchroom, with an R or a D next to themselves. And I would watch people from very different political leanings sitting there and having conversations about their family or their work or their bills. So what gives me hope is that I do believe that there is still an ability to see people as individuals. And I do have hope that politically there are still people in the process who believe that as well and um, are working toward some kind of a shared good or moderate policy.
Mhm.
Um, because I believe in people, and I think that that's one of the things that Dave has always taught me, which is he used to say it all the time, still says it today, is like expect good things from people. Like don't expect bad things from people. Like expect good things from people, and sometimes they'll prove you wrong. But if you begin from a place of like I'm going like and he said used to say this about his kids, I'm going to expect my children to do well. You expect your daughter to do well, to do good and to do well. And
Mhm.
because of those expectations you've set, she's done exceptionally well and she's doing exceptionally good. And I think that's a great picture, not just for our own personal relationships, but for education as a whole. Like I think we set different expectations for different students. Like I don't expect that student to do well, so therefore I'm not going to treat them the same or I'm going to teach them differently. Some of the most innovative models, some of the most remarkable models that transcend anything that you would believe from data are because the expectations are set. The expectations are you are going to do well.
Right.
Your expectations of Ariel is that like you're going to go to college. You are going to be successful in whatever, and that doesn't mean monetarily. It's just you're gonna have a purpose and you're gonna execute on that and you're gonna do well. And she will. And I think like that is part of that is something that we've lost and that we don't have the same expectations all the time. So my expectation is that people they're gonna exceed my expectations. And I do believe that at the end of the day, if we can just get to a place where politics is driven by um, progress and not hyperbole, then it will reward those people who see each other as individuals and want to work together.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So tell me something that you're proudest of.
Goodness, what am I proudest of? Um,
So many things, I'm sure.
no, no, no. At this point in my life at 42, like again, it sounds super cheesy and cliche. Like I'm very proud of my kids. They're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I watch them and I watch them stumble and get back up. So there's moments where I just say like I'm really proud of the person that you're becoming. My littlest one is still 7, so she's still really cute. So like she makes me really proud. But like even my 14-year-old, just her work ethic, my 12-year-old, just her spirit makes me really, really proud. Um, I'm proud that there were moments in my life where I had to make decisions that went against my own personal growth professionally, and I made those decisions. So I think I've tried really hard to make decisions that when I'm on my deathbed, I can look back and say, you know what, that was the right decision. From
Yeah.
a professional standpoint, I would like to believe that I've helped elevate the conversation around early childhood, right? I've tried really hard to bring new voices into the fold. And I would say this, and it's not certainly not me alone by any stretch of the imagination. It's Dave, it's Madeleine, it's you, it's Warren, it's all these people.
Mhm.
Like the conversation around early childhood is very different than it was 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And that makes me proud that we were part of that. And then still have a lot to do, but people talk about our issue very differently than when we were fighting 10 years ago, where it was just, oh, it's daycare. Like, oh, you
Yeah,
day, oh, well, yeah, just make sure the kids are safe at the end of the day. Like that's no longer the conversation.
absolutely. Well, I can't leave without asking you this. What bill excites you this year?
I am really interested. I would say this. I am really interested to see where the state lands on the alternate pathways piece, like that it becomes something that is finally realized. I know there's a lot around. There's bills right now around kind of like the regulatory structure for early childhood. Um, but my what I don't know if there's any particular bill that I'm like, oh my gosh, if that happens, it's going to change the world. I think it's all again that incremental progress that we need.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I am excited about is that when I got there, I joined now Senator Aaron Grawl, and like
Mhm.
they used to call us Batman and Robin, and I was Robin, she was Batman, and it was like the two of us just fighting.
Yeah.
And now as I look, I see so many more people who have picked up early childhood as an issue that they care about. So the Dana Trabolsis, the Fiona McFarlands, the Alexis Kaladiouds, like there's just so many more, and even beyond that, there's just so many more people that have made early childhood an issue that they are going to work on. Yeah, that is what excites me. Like that was always the goal: is how do we create more converts and more people who are evangelical on this issue? Because at the end of the day, my time in the legislature was finite. Every one of theirs will be finite, and our goal was always to create more people who were building. What we set out to was to build a movement.
I mean, and I know you have a really special relationship with Senator Kaladiud.
I do.
What an amazing woman.
She's awesome. I'm so proud. I did a video for the other day because she's getting a big award here in Miami, and I was joking. They were like, what can you tell us?" And I was like, she's really annoying. And I said it lovingly. I was like, because in some ways she's like my younger sister, and I don't say that in a patronizing way at all. It's like I've watched her grow, and she was by my side every step of the way while I was there. And part of hate is like part of life and quote leadership, to the extent that you can call it that, is you want to see the people that you've poured into succeed. So I have even more joy in seeing her become the legislator that she is than I do about anything that I personally accomplished. And that's what makes me, just to see her up there and to see her, command an audience, and to see people call, like you said, people call you about me. I still get people all the time who say, "Oh, we met with Senator Claus. She's wonderful." Like that warms my heart because I've watched her grow. And we're very, very blessed to have her in the process.
She's such a genuine person, and certainly, pivotal in lots of decision making I've made, probably without her even knowing, but lots of decisions I've made in my career stemmed from some of the legislation Grawl took on. And so I respect, I don't agree with everything, but I respect the work that she's done and the fight she goes after it with, right? So that's certainly a pivotal person.
I'm not sure there's a harder working legislator in Tallahassee than Aaron Grawl. And like you said, like you don't have to agree on everything, but you sure as heck need to acknowledge, like, we have not had a stronger champion for early childhood, at least for the decade that I was involved than her. Like she just knew this and just came to it through a lens of knew the system, knew how it worked.
Yeah.
Like, and it's just like that cannot be discounted. It matters so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Vance, this has been such a meaningful conversation and honestly, such a reminder that early learning isn't just about programs or policy or politics even. It's really about people and I guess moments and expectations that stay with us way after childhood. So, your journey from student to public servant to strategist to, I'm going to say it, mentor, right? Shows how learning compounds over a lifetime. And then when access and relationships are present, you really see that momentum. So thank you for not just doing the work you do, but for how you show up for young people, for families, and for future leaders, including my future leader. And, to our listeners, if today's conversation reminded you of someone who shaped your learning journey, or someone who you can be that person for, then reach out, share this episode, and keep the conversation going. This has been the Early Learning Conversations podcast, and I thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.